Since Facebook went public in 2012, the company has consistently shown strong revenue growth, which has led to Facebook becoming a very, very profitable company. However, they disclosed in their most recent 10K filing that they believe that their user growth rate is actually going to decline as the user base increases in size. In other words, that means that Facebook is becoming so large in terms of the number of users that it's getting harder and harder to sign up new users. If you think about the United States, for example, most people have a Facebook account already, so it's getting harder and harder to find new users who don't have a Facebook account. So this means trouble for Facebook because they've had such strong revenue growth over prior years. They've just increased their revenue every single year. They have just had really strong growth. And so if we're saying, okay, well, wait a minute, the user growth rate is actually going to decline, how is the company going to continue that strong track record of revenue growth? And a lot of people think the answer is Instagram and WhatsApp. Now, Instagram, so both these companies have been bought and are owned by Facebook, and they are having a lot stronger user growth than Facebook. However, they don't even generate close to the amount of revenues and profits that Facebook does. Instagram actually does generate some revenue now, several $billion in revenue, so they're more promising than WhatsApp. But WhatsApp generates almost no revenue at all. Now, Facebook is trying to figure out ways that they can better monetize both of these companies, but I don't want to discuss that because I want to talk about Facebook itself, because Facebook is so much larger in terms of the amount of revenue that is generated, at least right now, compared to Instagram and WhatsApp. Okay, so these are promising revenue sources. Instagram right now, WhatsApp possibly in the future, but let's just focus on Facebook itself, the Facebook website and Facebook mobile and so forth. Okay, now if we look at the daily active users, so the people that are using Facebook every day, now we look at, there are actually 4 geographic regions that Facebook breaks its performance into. So we got the US and Canada, we got Europe, Asia Pacific, and then rest of world. Okay, so those are the 4 geographic regions, and I've got by quarter the number of daily active users, and this is in millions. So you see in the fourth quarter of 2018, there were 186 million daily active users in the US and Canada. But if you go back, for example, the fourth quarter of 2016, so 2 years before, it was 180 million. So we went from 180 million to 186. So it grew, but not by much in the US and Canada. So that's what we see, that the growth rate is really declining. It doesn't mean that there are going to be fewer users in US and Canada in the future. It just means that it's slowing down. It's not as fast. Going from 180 million to 186 million, that's not that big a growth. Okay, so that is what, when Facebook executives are talking about the user growth rate slowing down and people saying, hey, let's focus more on Instagram and WhatsApp, now you know what they're talking about. However, you shouldn't just focus on Instagram and WhatsApp, and here's why. If you look at other geographic regions, for example, Asia Pacific, you'll see that if we go back to fourth quarter 2015, 309 million people using Facebook, but then it nearly doubled in just 3 years to 577 million. So Asia Pacific nearly doubled over a 3-year time span. And then rest of world went from 319 million to 478 million. That's an increase of about 50%. So that's pretty strong growth in these 2 regions right here. So Asia Pacific and rest of world, they have grown significantly, the user base, particularly when we compare it to the US and Canada. So yes, US and Canada, the growth rate has declined, is not growing as fast as it was when Facebook was originally launched. We understand that. Most people in the US and Canada already have a Facebook account. But in developing nations outside the US and outside Europe, there's actually very, very strong growth in terms of the number of users. And you can see that more clearly. So if we look at this graph here, you can see clearly there's very strong growth. So we've got the gray is Asia Pacific, and then yellow is rest of world. You see that 2 things from this. Number one, there are just a lot more users in general in Asia Pacific and rest of world than there are in the US and Canada. So that's much bigger markets, potentially, Asia Pacific and rest of world for Facebook. And think about it, there are just more people. Okay, there are a lot more people that live outside of the US and Canada than there are live in US and Canada. Most of the people in the world, okay, live in these regions here, Asia Pacific and rest of world. Okay, so there's a lot more people, and we see that it's growing at a much higher rate. Okay, so there is significant growth opportunities for Facebook, but they're in developing nations. Now, why is that an issue for Facebook? Okay, it's an opportunity, but it also has an issue. And the reason is that when you look at average revenue per user, this is ARPU, is abbreviated as by Facebook in their filings. So this average revenue per user is looking at, okay, how much ad revenue and so forth does Facebook generate? Because remember, Facebook is free. It's free to sign up an account. So you say, well, what do you mean revenue per user? They're talking about ad revenue. Facebook gets 99% of its revenue from advertising. And so they're looking at, okay, given the number of users that we have, how much do we generate in advertising revenue per user that we have? And in the US and Canada, in fourth quarter 2018, it was almost $35 per user that they're generating in terms of ad revenue. But just $2.96 in Asia Pacific. And then if we look at rest of world, $2.11. Okay, so even though Asia Pacific has the best growth rate in terms of users, so they're growing users at a rapid pace. We'll look at U.S. and Canada, they get almost like maybe 11 times, it looks like, 11 times the amount of revenue per user in the U.S. and Canada compared to Asia Pacific. So they're able to get a lot more money in ads. Okay, they generate a lot more money from ads, from running from advertisers who are targeting people in the U.S. and Canada, than they are from advertisers targeting people in Asia Pacific. So they can get a lot more money. They can monetize the users a lot better in the U.S. and Canada, and also to a lesser extent Europe. Okay, U.S. and Canada, although you see, is far and away the most. And U.S. and Canada has also increased. If we look back, so just over a 2-year time span, fourth quarter 2016 to fourth quarter 2018, it almost doubled the amount of revenue per user in the U.S. So even though the growth rate is declining in the U.S. and Canada, they're getting a lot more revenue per user. Why is that? Better ad targeting. Okay, people will be willing to pay more money. If you're an advertiser, you'll pay more money for an ad if you think that Facebook has done a good job targeting the person and that it's someone that will actually click on the ad. Okay, if you think, okay, I'm just going to pay for an ad and maybe there's a 1 in a million chance the person clicks, you're not going to pay as much for that ad. But if you think, wow, there's a 1 in 50 chance they'll click because that ad is relevant to them, you'd be more likely to pay. So there's better ad targeting, and so that is a significant increase in revenue per user. Now, revenue per user has gone up in Asia Pacific as well. It increased by 50% over that 2-year time span. However, it's just still so low. So there's significant growth opportunities for Facebook in terms of growing the number of users outside the U.S. Okay, they're experiencing rapid growth in the number of users. The U.S. has declined in terms of the growth rate. However, Facebook, if you think about their total revenue, remember, revenue can go up not just when they add more users, which they're clearly doing in Asia Pacific and rest of the world, but also when they have better ad targeting and increase the revenue per user. So if we think about the number of users, that can increase Facebook's revenue, and then also revenue per user. And it looks like they're increasing revenue per user everywhere, but particularly the US and Canada, because it's so large, it has more of an impact. But then also they're increasing the number of users and having strong growth outside the United States in developing nations. Now, if we can get to a point where they're able to better monetize the users in developing nations, okay, then the growth opportunities for Facebook continue. Again, what I'm trying to show you is there's a lot of opportunity here. For example, just look at the difference. So this blue bar here is U.S. average revenue per user, and we look at the big difference. Even just if you look at, it's not just developing nations versus non-developed, because look at Europe. Okay, there's even a big gap between Europe and the U.S. And imagine if Facebook can close this gap. Imagine if they can close that gap through better ad targeting or so forth. If they can generate and monetize the same amount, just even close to what they're getting in the U.S. and Canada for each user, there are significant growth opportunities for Facebook if they can close that gap and increase here. Okay, so there's a lot of opportunity, not just increasing the number of users outside the U.S., but also, and again, now here's just a breakdown. We think about in terms of 2018, their share of revenue. Now, they're largely dependent on U.S. and Canada. That's almost 50% of their revenue comes from U.S. and Canada. And then if you add in Europe, we're talking now U.S., Europe, and Canada. That is 70% of Facebook's revenue. So they don't get, there's only 30% of their revenue is coming from outside U.S. and Europe. But most of the people in the world live in these regions right here. Okay, most of the people in the world. So if they can continue to sign up and increase the number of users and again, that growth is going to come here from these regions because most of the people here are already signed up. If they can continue to grow the number of users here and they can continue to improve ad targeting and increase that ARPU, the average revenue per user, not just in the US and Canada, but also in Europe and also then in developing nations, there could be continued revenue growth. Okay, Facebook can continue that upward trajectory. Okay, and I'm not just talking about Instagram and WhatsApp. Now, if they could develop Instagram and WhatsApp also into reliable sources of revenue, then there's even more opportunity for Facebook in terms of growing its total revenue in the future. And if you want to read more about this, I'll put a link to an article I wrote in the description section below.